It began with silence. Not the easy kind that hums behind traffic and sprinklers and faraway music, but the deep, pressured dome hush you feel in a sealed room. Two wine glasses sat half full on polished wood, candles arrested mid-drip, wax threaded like white vines in the air that never finished falling. At the far end of the table, a chair was pushed back just enough to imply a rising body, a decision, and a breath caught and held for decades. They were a pair everyone in the hills believed would live forever inside their glass world. Rowan Carrington and Elise Carrington, a couple whose driveway curved like a sentence that never ended, whose lights glowed warmly behind climbing ivy, and whose parties sent laughter drifting through oaks and into the soft night. And then, one October evening in 1998, their gate clicked, their car vanished, and the house learned to live with echo. If you're drawn to long, quiet mysteries that refuse to close, subscribe. The story always starts with the table, because it looks like intent fossilized. Two plates, linen folded like small sleeping birds, a bottle beating cool condensation, a ring of water beneath a coaster, and a knife set at an angle that would bother anyone who loved symmetry. People think houses forget. They don't. They keep the temperature of the last touch. They hold drafts and scents and the patience of dust. And this house held everything except the people it was meant to hold. Three possibilities were whispered and printed, and repeated so often they hardened into a triad. They ran. They were taken. Or the lie they built their lives upon finally collapsed and buried them beneath it. Which one do you believe when the scene offers only objects, and the objects refuse to confess? The first recorded detail after the silence wasn't the missing car. It was the alarm system that didn't scream when the door latched behind whoever left. The red diode on the panel blinked like a worn eye. The housekeeper, arriving late morning, called a name and then another, set down her keys in the little ceramic bowl by the door, and felt a cold bloom spread up her arms. She could never describe later, except to say, it was like stepping into a paused movie. Pause is a kind word for it. The flowers on the counter had begun their slow bow. A purse lay open, its contents scattered in a geometry that suggested hands searched or hands hurried. Upstairs, a bed was turned down but unclaimed. Hotel crisp in a home that had never needed to pretend to be anything else. Each room offered a single image, as if curated by someone careful about how much to give. In the garage, a smear of tire dust in an arc that could be an exit or rearrangement. In the study, a stack of envelopes, one unsealed, the flap stuck to itself, as if reconsidering whether it should be opened. On the closet floor, a silk scarf, coiled like a pale animal at rest, one edge darkened by a spill that had dried without smell. Absence has its own odor, a faint metallic chill you only notice when you are searching for someone who isn't there. And the home breathes differently around you. Rumor arrived faster than record, as it always does. Neighbors talk in driveways. A jogger says she saw a sedan idling by the gate around midnight, and someone in the passenger seat moved like they didn't want to be seen. A gardener swears he heard raised voices 2 afternoons prior, the kind of argument that carries through hedge and across stone. A delivery driver remembers a package refused, returned to sender, scrawled on the label in a hand too elegant to be sudden. But the ledger we keep for rumor is not the ledger that stands in court, and the folder stamped with the case number grew heavy with contradictions. Phones unused, credit quiet. Then 3 days later, a receipt in a gas station miles south shows a transaction at 8:53 p.m. And the signature, looped and tidy, could be either of them or neither. We are trained to anchor to the first indelible image because it seems honest. A table speaks plainly. Someone was here, then someone wasn't. But what if that image is a stage? What if the scene is a kindness, arranged to soften a blow, or a weapon arranged to mislead? Hold the glass up to the light, and you see fingerprints. Press the wax, and it yields a body-warm impression, then cools around your thumbprint. And now the story includes you, whether you want it to or not. The drive into town from the ridge takes you past a bend where the city spreads like a handful of coins on velvet, and far beyond, a road that runs toward heat and flatness and the long, low hum of the western desert. People map their lives to roads the way trees map themselves to light. In the years that followed, small maps multiplied. A dot where a scrap of paper was found under a seat rail in a recovered vehicle, a dot where a gate camera captured a pair of headlights that didn't belong to the house, and a dot where a phone call pinged a tower and then went dark. Connect the dots, and you draw a shape that looks like intent, or fear, or both at once. When their names first rolled across news tickers and radio, they tasted like varnish and silver. Wealth is a costume that renders you both visible and untouchable until it doesn't. Reporters liked saying the house had a ballroom and library, and liked pairing images of the couple smiling at charity events with the stark tape that would later bisect the driveway. In those early days, faces turned toward the gate more than toward each other. People like to witness entrances because entrances make sense. There is a door, it opens, someone comes in, and we are less good with exits. The gate had learned the rhythm of their life, and now learned silence. A detective whose voice never climbed above a murmur ran a hand along the table edge, pressed the dot of a fingertip into the cooled wax, and said to no one in particular, "The scene stayed the same. The story did not." That's the trouble with evidence. It can be true and useless, or true and misleading, or true and not yet ready to say what it means. Far away from that house and its held breath, a sun-baked shoulder of desert will someday offer up a box that turns every early conclusion on its head. But we don't know that yet. All we know here, at the start, is that names cannot keep a body in a room any more than money can keep a storm from lowering over a city. The couple had a habit, people said later, of driving at dusk down a boulevard of pecans and sycamores, and then onto the loop that circled the city like a wedding band. He drove, and she tuned the radio until she found a voice she liked, then turned it down low so it felt like company but not intrusion. Habits are maps, too. We think we can follow them to a fixed point. The last person who spoke to them was an assistant, a colleague, or a distant friend. The accounts vary, but they said the same sentence in 3 different versions over the years. They sounded fine. They sounded hurried. They sounded like they were saying goodbye without saying goodbye. Which is it? What did you hear? What did you choose to hear? The world has a way of fitting your answers under your questions so neatly, you don't notice you're the one who arranged them. Their names make it easier to talk about them here in the opening, Rowan and Elise, because pronouns are too vague and titles too cold. But names are also anchors we drop into dark water, hoping they catch on something we can pull, something that will lift weight and memory and certainty to the surface. 27 years later, something will rise. Not a body, not a confession. A cache dragged from heat-buckled ground will whisper a chronology no one expected. But that is a later scene, a later cut. For now it is night, softening at the edges of a house that used to sit effortless in its own myth. And in the dining room a ring of water still stains the table, and the candles hold their small pale stalactites, and the air hums with a radio tuned low somewhere, nowhere, as if someone walked out of the room to answer the gate and meant to return before the music finished, as if the pause had merely gotten out of hand. Morning heat rose off the boulevard in a wavering sheet, making the air above the black iron gate look liquid, like the city itself might pour through if you lifted the latch. 27 years had flattened the hedges and fattened the live oaks. Vines had learned the exact language of the fence and spoke it back in green. The house beyond wore the years politely. Fresh paint covered hairline cracks. A new security camera blinked with the bored precision of a metronome. But when the investigators stood at the threshold, hand resting on the warm metal of the gate, the old hush met her like a memory you almost remember, and then lose. Present day, the on-screen slate would say in white letters over a slow push toward the front door, and beneath it, the month and a time that meant little except that the light fell right for photographs. She had studied this house for so long in paper radiographs, floor plans, evidence shots, and cataloged angles that stepping onto the actual flagstone felt like walking into a known dream. She carried no dramatic gesture with her, only a spiral notebook, a small digital recorder, a pen that clicked too loudly, and the kind of quiet you bring to churches and hospitals. The air smelled faintly of cut grass, stone warmed by sun, and lemon oil with a memory of smoke the house insisted was never there. The current owners had left for the day. They trusted her to be patient with their living space, to tread everywhere gently, and to notice and not disturb. She moved like a museum guard, like a librarian, like someone who knows you can bruise a story by handling it wrong. In the foyer, the ceramic bowl waited on its little table, still catching keys and coins for people who never noticed how often they relied on it. The investigator held her breath and let the temperature of the room write itself onto her skin. A camera would drift past the bowl, then the mirror with its faint scratch where a ring had once grazed the glass, then the green radio on the sideboard, a relic that hummed when plugged in. Not music, not voices, just a low room tone that made you look toward doorways. She didn't touch the radio. The dining room had been redecorated. The table that once held the frozen tableau belonged to someone else now. Darker wood, heavier grain. Still, she could see the old image layered like tracing paper on the present. The candle holders remained, polished, wax removed, but a pale ring remained in the finish where heat had once pooled. She stood where the chair had sat, at its not quite pushed-in angle, and closed her eyes until the half-light of memory arranged itself. Glass beaded with condensation, a knife turned slightly wrong, and napkins folded with a care that asked to be noticed. The scene stayed the same. The story did not. In her ear, the partner back at the office spoke through a small earpiece. "Copy you at the residence," he said. He was the sort who filled silence only with data dates, maps, and watch logs, and never the comfort words some officers used as if they were gauze. "Audio rolling?" "Rolling," she said, and her voice sounded different inside the house, smaller and steadier at once. She walked the path the first responders had walked 2 decades earlier, the one drawn in arrows on the first responder map. Foyer, dining, kitchen, study, back hallway, master suite. She stopped where the alarm panel had blinked that first morning. The model had been replaced, of course, but the wiring conduit cut into the plaster was the same, a neat rectangular tunnel, inked over with paper and paint. She could almost hear the tiny red diode from the report blinking like a tired eye. Blink, pause, blink. It's strange how a machine's light can read as emotion when you want it to. She noted the sound here now, the thrum of distant air conditioning, compressing weather into something a room tolerates, the faintest tick of pipes expanding in the walls, and the outside world muffled into a cottony absence. She held a hand an inch above the countertop, where, in photographs, a handbag had once spilled itself into a loose catalog of a life. Lipstick open and cooling against granite, wallet splayed, pen rolling toward the edge, as if a hand had pulled away too quickly. In the study, the leather chair had been replaced by something modern, but the window still faced the same slope of yard, and the same angle of live oak, and the afternoon light still landed on the desk, where a stack of envelopes had once waited, with one unsealed flap, reconsidering its obedience to glue. The investigator leaned forward into that square of light and flattened her notebook so the page didn't curl. She wrote a single line. The place held its lines. The script changed actors. A neighbor had told her years ago that he measured time by who turned left or right at the end of this drive. The couple used to turn right at twilight, circle the loop, and return when the house lights had learned to glow. After they were gone, Squads turned left, then right, then again, as if geometry could solve human intent. "You want the evidence room next?" the partner asked. "Let's finish the walk," she said, and took the back hall toward the stairs, where the carpet still dulled sound like snowfall. The master bedroom was not an exhibit anymore. New colors, a new bed, and a throw blanket, draped as carelessly as catalog photographs pretend is natural. She stood at the foot of the bed and looked at the wooden floor, remembering the first crime scene images. A sheet turned back with authoritarian neatness, corners squared, and pillows arranged like expectations. Empty rooms don't expose what happened. They expose what didn't. She wrote, "Bed turned down, but sleep refused." The bathroom mirror, in 1998, had worn a misted oval around its edges, where steam had dried in a slow halo. Now it just showed her face and the ceiling light, and behind those, if she tilted her head, a carpenter's pencil mark on the frame. The house told its own small truths even when people did not. Downstairs again, she stood at the back door and looked across the yard to where the garden meets the slope. A fox or a cat moved and then dissolved into shrubs. The gate at the far corner still stuck when opened. You could see the greenish rub marks on the latch, where metal learned to negotiate with metal. Someone had once said they saw a car idle along the fence line here, lights off, long enough to gather meaning. Someone else claimed they heard raised voices. "Do you believe witnesses?" the partner asked once. "I believe the weather," she had told him. "It doesn't remember with malice." In the present, weather laid its warm hand across her neck. "Okay," she said, turning toward the front. "Take me downstairs." In the archives, you learn to love the smell of old glue and cardboard, and the sweet sour note of negatives inside their sleeves. The police property room did not care about romance, but even fluorescent light and white labels can't strip objects of personality. The box with this house's case number had been opened more recently than most. She rolled the steel ladder along the shelving like a library move and pulled the carton down with both hands, feeling the slight sag of one corner where time had softened it. Inside, photographs in evidence sleeves, a landline answering machine with its tiny cassettes, 2 wineglass stems capped with plastic, their bowls taped like fragile lungs, a torn page from a day planner with grocery items that now read like fossils, rosemary, pears, a specific bottle labeled in neat, precise script, a gas station receipt that should not have existed when it did, a strip of glossy prints from a camera mounted at the gate, each image time-stamped, each frame a new attempt to see. She lifted the answering machine carefully and held it to her ear, knowing there was no sound left in its plastic body, but imagining anyway the click and whir and the voices it once ate and stored. Somewhere in these cassettes lived a voice saying, "We'll be late," or "We just left," or the more terrible absence of any call at all. She logged everything like a priest names saints. Glass, cassette, receipt, frames. She spoke each word for the camera with the particular slowness of someone translating. "Dates?" the partner asked. She read them aloud and listened to how wrong one of them sounded inside the chronology people had memorized. "That's our first crease," he said. "We knew that," she said. But even so, the way the numbers lined up made her sit down on the low metal stool and breathe shallowly. Records obey time. Rumor does not. The investigator set the gas slip beside the gate frames and considered what a person would have to do to engineer both. Move a car, leave a gate, use a card, wipe a handle, and drive a road that doesn't forgive sloppiness. "Do you think the scene was staged?" the partner asked. She had been asked versions of that question for years. She knew better than to answer like a magician. "I think staging leaves brushstrokes," she said. "Sometimes you only see them when you hold the canvas at an angle." She held the receipt higher, letting the fluorescent ceiling stripe across the ink. Someone had pressed hard when signing. Someone had decided to be legible. Why? Who signs clearly when they plan to vanish? Outside, late light leaned long through the high windows and fell in bars across the concrete floor. Dust made these bars visible, a floating alphabet of particles that kept trying to spell an answer. The cassette reels inside the answering machine glinted when the light caught them. For a second, they looked like eyes. She closed the box and slid it back toward the lip of the table, not yet ready to return it to its shelf. The walkthrough had written its notes in her bones. The archive had offered its quiet chorus of objects and their stubborn vagueness. "Tomorrow?" the partner asked. "Tomorrow," she said. She didn't mention the message she'd found in her inbox the night before. An unsigned email with no subject line and a single sentence in the body. "You won't find them in the river. You won't find them at all. There are messages you report and messages you carry a while to see if they grow teeth." She shut off the evidence room lights and let the door close with a soft seal. Outside, evening assembled itself with the efficiency of a well-run stage crew. Cicadas winding up, the heat relaxing into something that could be called weather again, and the road out of town unscrolling like a ribbon of black glass. If you look at the map from above, the ridge house sits like the head of a pin driven into the edge of a city, and the highways thread outward toward ranchland, and then mesas, and then the long, unadorned distances where, years from now, heat will swell the lids of a wooden box and a shovel blade will strike wood. She paused on the sidewalk and looked back at the gate. It looked back without expression. The place gave no answer. It began with a smell, not blood, not smoke, lemon oil and the faint sweetness of cut pears browning in the air, a domestic note that pushed against the hour like a hand against a locked door. Officially, the first clock tick belongs to a call that never connected. At 8:11 p.m., a relative dialed, let it ring 15 times, and hung up. That detail sits in a phone bill like a rattlesnake coiled on a ledger line, inert until you notice. At 8:47, a neighbor walking a dog noticed the dining room light burning, and the front door sitting not quite closed, the deadbolt misaligned by an inch of chance. At 9:03, a housekeeper sent an anxious message that reads like a cough. "Here, now. Door open. No one answering." The 911 tape begins with room tone, the same hush we described earlier, air pressed flat by weather and refrigeration, and a silence that imitates patience. "Residence on the lane with the white columns," the caller said. "I think something is wrong." The dispatcher asked for details. The caller gave none that would satisfy a report, only sensations. "It's too quiet, and the air feels wrong." And once, softly, the table is set. The first responder report has different grammar. Boxes, check marks, timestamps. 9:21 unit arrived. 9:22 exterior sweep. 9:24 entry announced. They describe the threshold as if it were a terrain feature. Door ajar, latch scored, hinge sound minimal. They note the alarm panel. System off. Last code entry unknown. They place boots the way surgeons place instruments. Precisely, cleanly, with nothing touching what does not need to be touched. The dining room photographs were taken with a camera that leaves visible grain in dusk light. You can see it in the glass beads on the tablecloth and in the shadows under the candlesticks where wax had begun to pool and then arrested mid-drip. One plate bears a crescent of salt like the ocean's memory. One knife points toward the edge, not parallel to the fork, an angle that reads as a thought interrupted. In the kitchen, the granite counter holds an open handbag with its mouth turned outward, a private body made public. The contents were logged in a list that now feels like a biography through objects. Lipstick uncapped, a small notebook with quick grocery lines, rosemary, pears, and a bottle named in careful script. And a key fob separate from the ring as if recently detached. A hand towel at the sink is damp but folded. The dryer under the counter is still warm at 9:37. A heat that will not agree or disagree with any theory you ask it to hold. In the study, the chair is angled toward the window, not the desk, as if someone had been watching the weather for meaning. The desk contains bills aligned like soldiers. Beneath them, tucked at the back, was a postcard with a landscape printed in greens and reds, blank on its message side, except for the impression of a sentence written too hard on the previous page. The impression reads like a refusal to disappear. Upstairs, the master bed is turned down with the geometry of habit, corners squared to signal expectation, not haste. On the nightstand, a book with its ribbon, placed 3 chapters in. A glass of water wearing one fingerprint at the mouth, too faint to pull, too present to ignore. A closet stands open by an inch, and the hangers inside are spaced with a kind of social distance that makes absence visible. In the bathroom, the mirror shows the first responder, and in the same frame, the empty doorway behind them. The photograph catches that doubling by accident. Yet it becomes one of the images. The case lives on. Someone looking at the absence of someone else looking back. Outside, the gate camera ticks through its frames with civic indifference, time-stamping an empty road, a passing sedan, a cat, nothing, nothing, and the flare of headlights turned away. One frame at 8:3 reflects twin arcs of light where the street curves. One at 8:5 shows the same space dim again. Reviewing the strip years later, you can't unsee the way anticipation writes itself into the brain. We wait for an arrival that does not arrive. We scroll and hope. The radio log notes the arrival of a supervisor at 10:1 and the call for additional units at 10:12. They tag objects that will later become protagonists. 2 wine glasses on the drying rack, bowls with shallow pools of light, and a folded sweater on the chair back as if a shoulder had just left. They record no signs of struggle. They circle that phrase twice. Rumor arrives as it always does, on feet and in whispers, later codified into sentences that say always and never. They always left by 9. They never left a door open. Someone says a car idled near the back fence at twilight, headlights off, engine low. Someone else says they heard raised voices, but not the words, just the shapes anger makes in air. The investigator prefers records to the heat of remembered emotion, but she listens anyway because rumor often points toward the corner of the room where the record eventually looks. The answering machine sits on the kitchen counter like a black stone box. The cassettes inside it are the size of matchbooks and hold voices like lakes hold sky. The first responder noted it blinking. The technician later logged 3 messages. One from a delivery service confirming a time window, one from a friend asking if they were still on for Thursday, and one that began with breathing and ended with silence. No one can prove whether the breathing was intentional or a wire's artifact. All we know is that the machine kept that breath the way a room keeps a smell. By midnight, the scene is sealed, numbers assigned, film bagged, and the house turned from home to exhibit. A patrol unit idles at the curb, engine ticking under a sky too large for the city to claim. In the morning, when the sun lifts and the press trucks arrive, the drive will fill with lenses and microphones, and phrases like, "No sign yet," and "investigators are hopeful," will make their rounds. But before the lights and the tripods, there is just this: the wooden spoon lying at an angle on the stovetop. The back door closed, but not locked. A single orange seed dried to a teardrop on the counter near a cutting board that still smells like rind. Interleaved with the official account are the small, disobedient artifacts that refuse to be only facts. A child's drawing magneted to the side of the fridge, long out of date, but somehow still clinging. A crooked house, 2 tall figures, and a short one between, all smile lines. A map tucked into a cookbook, not of the city but of desert roads 2 states away, its folds soft from use. A receipt for fuel dated 3 days later, already waiting to contradict what people thought they knew. And then the thing that isn't here at all: The silver sedan that should be in the garage, the one neighbors recognize by the ding on its rear quarter. The empty bay looks larger than bays ever do when cars sit obediently inside them. Its concrete holding a faint arc of rubber where tires used to live, and a darker patch where oil learned this square of floor by heart. The absence of a car can be louder than the presence of a body. A detective once said that to a reporter, then regretted saying it out loud. But the line survives because it feels like truth. The reconstruction ends, as truth often does, with a missing piece, pretending it is only a small thing, an answering tape that snaps when rewound. A final frame from the gate camera with a sliver of reflection no one can source. A day planner with one page ripped neatly along its perforation. Later, someone will insist that page bore a single word written twice. Later, someone else will insist it was blank. For now, the log closes at 2:06 with a simple sentence that sounds like a prayer and a failure together. Occupants not located. The place gave no answer. The record held. The rumor grew. Rumor moves faster than record. It doesn't need timestamps or signatures. It borrows a neighbor's coat, carries a paper cup from a corner cafe, and by the time it crosses the street, it has become certainty with a first name. The disappearance turned a quiet lane into a choir of confident whispers. They were leaving for good. They were in trouble. They were saints. They were sharks. Flip a coin until you get the answer you already wanted. Meanwhile, the record is boring on purpose. It stacks times like bricks and invites you to measure. The first week's field notes list interviews in a tidy column. The housekeeper, a seasonal grounds worker, 2 neighbors along the lane, a security patrol driver, and a courier who rang at 6:18 and left a parcel at the service door. For a day or two, each account agrees from a distance. Then a slant appears subtle, like a picture hung one nail too low, and once you notice, you cannot unsee the lean. The housekeeper sits at a small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, as if warmth has jurisdiction over memory. She says she left at 7:05, the table set, the glasses breathing cold. They were teasing each other, she adds, and then winces, because tenderness sounds like evidence when the room is empty afterward. As she pulled away, she heard a scrape at the side gate, metal on metal, a brief shiver through the fence, the kind of noise you would ignore if you didn't know what it meant later. Across the lane, a neighbor folds and refolds a leash while she talks. They never left lights on upstairs, she insists, and the word never floats above the page like a helium balloon. She walked the dog at 8:40. She saw the foyer lamp and the dining dimmer, the rest dark. Someone was in the study, she adds. You can feel when a room is occupied, even if you can't see a face. The logbook notes the study chair angled to the window. The camera caught only its silhouette. Feeling does not write the report, but it lingers like cologne after the wearer is gone. The grounds worker says he trimmed hedges that afternoon and saw a silver sedan he didn't recognize, idling by the service gate, angled wrong for someone who lived there. He gestures with his hand, as if placing the car anew, his index finger tracing the arc of a tire that may not have existed. At dawn the next day, an evidence photo captures fresh tread pressed into damp soil behind the fence line. The width suggests 2 vehicles, not one. He feels vindicated when he hears that later. That too becomes rumor. 2 cars, 2 departures, 2 futures. The security patrol driver, the witness to the case, learns to orbit. He worked nights back then, a man with a thermos and a habit of taking notes because the hours otherwise stamped him flat. We meet in a strip mall coffee shop whose ceiling hums like an appliance trying not to fail. He remembers a sedan parked nose-in along the back fence at 8:26. Lights off, engine on. Exhaust a pale ribbon against cooler air. I slowed, he says. I tried to read the plate. The frame caught glare. I got 3 letters, not the numbers. He wrote them on his route sheet, then underlined the time. a small act of insistence against fog. He also remembers a sensation he didn't write, being watched as he idled there, not from the car, but from the hedges beyond it, where the property drops into a drainage swale. Like a lens, he says. Like someone held a camera and held their breath. He drove on because that is what the route required. The front gate shows nothing at 8:26, except the ordinary world doing its best. An evening jogger, a delivery van choosing a different turn, and a moth learning the shape of light. Observation meets absence, and leaves a bruise. In the days after, rumor eats. It chews the notion of a staged scene and spits out motives. Money, betrayal, escape. It grips a counterstory that dresses like righteousness. A door opened to help someone, and kindness became a trap. The phone logs don't care. They mark call attempts, not intentions. The ledger of deliveries doesn't care either. It notes a parcel left at the service door precisely and leaves the contents blank because nobody opened it in front of the book. When the courier comes forward, he brings a detail you can smell. The door, he says, stood ajar, by a hand's width. The air from inside carried lemon and new rain. He insists he heard a voice just beyond the threshold, a man saying, "Back in a minute," though he never saw that man. The record places the delivery. It does not promise the voice. Still, the line sticks, the way a burr clings to denim. Doesn't that sound like something you would say if you meant to keep the night ordinary? You can hear the case sorting itself. The worksheet lists origin theories: voluntary flight, targeted crime, and accident with concealment. Pros and cons under each. And for a few days, the columns balance like scales. Finances steady versus property filings odd. No threats on record versus an unknown sedan. Careful habits versus an unlocked door. Then a small weight slides, and the plate tips. A fuel receipt surfaces 3 days later, 2 counties away, signed with a hand that mimics but does not match. The merchant's camera points towards cigarettes and gum, not the counter. Someone, somewhere, kept the story moving. The patrol driver remains steady. He never adds to his story, even when silence would let him dress it. In his kitchen, he keeps old notebooks, ruled paper gone butter yellow. On a page dated that month, unrelated to the night, he had written a line that doesn't belong to streetlights or gates. The river takes what it is offered. He shrugs when asked why. A sermon on the radio, he says, embarrassed. But the words lean against the case like an uninvited guest. What, exactly, was being offered, and by whom? The last rumor that week is shaped like a person. A woman calls the tip line and says she saw them at a roadside cafe 2 mornings later, laughing. She insists on the color of a scarf, the kind of laugh, and the way a hand touched a sleeve. The receipt places a fuel stop on that road at that hour. The camera inside the cafe points at a fridge filled with bottled drinks, not at faces. The tape was overwritten by Tuesday. We test what we can. The scarf can be any color if no one captured the light. Rumor versus record isn't a battle. It's a braid. Pull one strand and find the other wrapped around it, tight enough to leave an impression. By week's end, the chart on the wall includes arrows between statements, dotted lines for courage, and solid lines for ink. We circle 3 times where the lines converge: the sound at the side gate, the idling sedan, and the breath held in the hedges. Do those details add up to a shape or a shadow? The place gives no answer, and the question learns to wait. The lab is a place where voices lower on instinct, as if the hum of instruments asks for respect, and the fluorescent light has jurisdiction over certainty. The air carries solvent, and the faint mineral smell of water pulled through filters until it forgets what it touched. On a stainless table, evidence becomes less like rumor and more like matter. The floor mat, wrapped in plastic, the belt segment, clipped and labeled, and swabs the color of dusk. The examiner walks us through with a pencil, tapping not for noise but for measure. First, she says, the red-brown trace from the passenger side carpet. It's older than the night in question by chemistry's clock. Heat cycles and humidity etch their signatures along the edges of the stain, a kind of tree ring for liquids. The profiles it gives do not match the couple. One contributor reads as male, partial, and degraded. The other reads as female, cleaner, and stubbornly present. Neither belongs to Cameron nor Lila. The note on the report feels almost polite, inconsistent with known references. The rumor that played for a month about an argument turning violent inside the car trips on this single fact and falls without making a sound. It is enough to change everything, and not nearly enough. The seatbelt piece is worse if you like your accidents pure. The webbing is clean where it should be frayed and scored where it should be smooth. Under magnification, the fibers look like a field after frost, edges fused and shiny, not torn. Heat, the examiner says. Not a campfire, not the sun. Focused, immediate. A tool, maybe improvised. You can free a person in a hurry, or you can separate a person from a restraint in a hurry. The metal tongue shows witness marks on one side only, a nick that pairs with the scoring. This wasn't a simple unbuckle, she adds. Someone decided. The impact geometry refutes the front-to-back story as well. The front looks like a slide into scrub, but the blade of compression lives in the flank. A shove. If you've ever moved a stalled car with your shoulder, you know the stance. Set, lean, and hold your breath. Multiply that by 2 tons. Add impatience, and leave scratches that remember the angle of your certainty. Under the car, we find a smear of a different kind. Pale paint on the frame lip, transferred, not native. We run it because that is what the form demands. The library says the shade is common on mid-size sedans from a decade prior. Common is a good word for burying hope. Out at the fuel stop where the receipt was written 3 days later, we stand 6 inches left of the camera that looked everywhere except at what we want now. The clerk remembers a hat and a posture more than a face. Didn't want to be seen, he says, and then laughs. Because who does, really, at midnight in the fluorescent? The pen stroke on the receipt is a cousin to the missing man's, not a twin. The loop on the R is thinner, and the tail on the N doesn't connect. You can teach your hand to mimic someone else's. It will still leave an accent if anyone cares to listen. We listen, but the paper will not sing the chorus we expect. Back in the city, financial records widen, not to indict, but to breathe. A mailbox in another county receives envelopes at a steady pulse. The rents are paid in cash from a separate source that nonetheless shares a rhythm with the life on Cherrywood. A single key appears in a drawer, unremarkable, except for tape wrapped around its bow and a number written there, 17. We tag it, and we don't use it yet. That kind of restraint is rare in stories and labs both. The parcel from the service door sat for weeks in the evidence locker like a punchline we were too polite to tell. We open it now, not for drama, but because inventory audits have a way of cutting to the front of the line. Inside, a paperback full of dog-eared pages about travel in the desert, a folded map with a route traced in pencil that stops at an unlabeled square, and an envelope taped to the back cover with 2 items. A photocopy of a lease for a storage unit, under a neutral name and a small brass tag stamped 17. That again, Ruiz says. And because repetition is either a coincidence or a design, my stomach goes quiet. The grounds behind the study window give us something small enough to miss if you haven't been practicing humility. In the dust that blooms when the sprinklers turn off, 3 partial shoe prints overlap like arguments at a dinner table. 2 belong to the same tread, a common flat boot, common in size, suggesting a woman or a slight man. The third is narrow at the waist and deep at the heel, a runner's shoe, maybe, set at a hangback angle as if the person who made it was thinking about leaving before they arrived. Soil trapped in the boot lug collects in a paper packet. Under a scope, mica, a red grit, and a fleck of something that looks like ground glass. The city has all three in particular places if you match your maps to your patients. Small facts are rude that way. They demand scale from you. The call logs eat an afternoon and then give something back. A second number lived on a prepaid phone, used sparingly, sitting on towers that prefer to be ignored. It pings along a river road 2 nights after the couple went quiet, then sleeps for a week, then stirs near a self-storage complex behind a bait shop in another county. The company there keeps hours that suggest indifference. The manager shrugs at our questions with the practiced ease of someone who understands the price of memory. Unit numbers, she says, flipping a ledger with a wet finger, are like apartment numbers. The quiet ones belong to people who don't move as often as they should. 17 is quiet in ink and loud under a flashlight. Inside, neat stacks of boxes breathe dust and ordinary air. The climate control is broken enough to smell like seasons. On the first shelf, table linens, a blender, and framed prints wrapped in sheets. Domestic life in a truck's worth of parcels. On the second shelf, a banker's box with a sticker from a law office, and a neat hand in the corner that reads simply, "To review." We don't open that yet either. The form says, "List, seal, move." The widened field happens without fanfare. A colleague from Financial Crimes walks in with a manila folder and a line that could be a joke but isn't. "They had more credit than sense," he says, and then lays out transfers that arc toward a charity no one's heard of, a club that doesn't appear on maps, and a vendor who ships art and accepts returns in person only. None of this is illegal in the way that makes an arrest arrive. All of it is unusual in the way that makes a plot roll over and show the bruise it has been hiding. We revisit the study and watch dust fall in the projector beam, the way snow falls in a town that doesn't know how to stop moving. On the desk, a small divot marks where a heavy object once sat and was moved recently enough to leave a paler circle under it. A safe, maybe, or a box with weight, the kind that travels with secrets inside and leaves absence as a receipt. We interview the partner from the early years of the man's first career. He says, "They drifted, that's all." He stares at his hands, and exasperation runs its thumb along the edge of his voice. He liked control, he offers finally. She liked being the one person he couldn't predict. A neat line, unhelpful. We talk to a relative who keeps photos in an album, not online. She points to smiles, and says what everyone points to, and says, "They seemed happy." Seeming is a costume. The first hard reversal sits on the table and refuses to be dramatic. Blood in the car that isn't theirs. A belt that was opened by heat, not habit. A push where the road didn't act alone. A key with a number written twice, without prompting. A storage lease that belongs to a name that belongs to no one you can call. The public story about a couple who vanished into their own storm loses the front row. A second, less charitable story takes its seat. Someone moved the car. Someone cut the belt. Someone stood in the hedges and held their breath, while a patrol driver drove on. If you widen the lens further, a question arrives that you can taste. Were the missing exactly victims that night? Or were they already practicing an art that anything with practice becomes? At the storage unit, we bag the map from the paperback and flatten it back at the office under glass. The pencil route stops where the desert begins to forget its own names. In the margin, a small circle is drawn around nothing. Inside the circle is a dot. No label, no ego, just intent. Out loud, to no one in particular, I hear myself ask the wrong question first. What were they planning to hide there? The better question follows after, smaller and colder. Who? The place gives no answer. The file grows a spine. And somewhere, a key stamped 17 warms in my pocket as if it knows there is a lock we have not yet earned. The warrant is plain paper, the room plain light, and still it feels like crossing a line. Unit 17 exhales detergent and dust. On the shelf, the banker's box waits with a label that pretends it isn't a dare. Tape parts, folders breathe, and the objects introduce themselves in the old, quiet way. Photocopies of faces that are theirs and not the hair altered, the glasses added, or the names replaced with softer syllables that leave no splinters. Ticket stubs cut clean, always cash, always 2 seats, sometimes a third marked minor, then crossed out in a darker pen. A ledger, hand-ruled on tea-colored paper, where initials march in pairs, circles and triangles halo some entries. A small mark repeats at the margin, a vertical line cut through a ring. A flat tin rattles. Inside, a plastic bracelet stretched thin, a motel tag with the room number filed off, and a Polaroid of a table set for 3. No faces, just glass catching flash. Beneath the folders, there is a passport cover, with 2 passports that do not belong to the names they bear. Under the lamination, the texture hums wrong. A light skims, and numbers lift like bruises. Coordinates pressed, not printed. Someone meant for them to be found, and not by accident. The letter rides the bottom like ballast. No greeting, no goodbye. We thought it was a door, it says, and we learned it was a circle. Insurance, dressed as virtue. Copies of the things that could not be kept. If you're reading this, then either we got free or we didn't. Ruiz studies the ledger, and then the stains we already know don't match the couple. Either they ran the thing, he says, or they broke it and kept notes. Both can be true. That's why it holds. We photograph everything because later we will need to argue with our own doubt. We repack in the order we found because chaos likes to claim credit it hasn't earned. The only items we take are the numbers written twice, then again on my wrist, where a pulse will remind me. The topo has a small circle drawn over what looks like nothing. A spade, cord, water, a notebook. On the drive, the city thins and the road decides what we're allowed to think about. Weather reports pass without opinion. The late news mentions a fire 2 counties over and names no one. The letter rides the visor like a quiet passenger. The desert approaches without theatrics, a long, flat thought interrupted by basalt knuckles and low ribs of hills that, on aerials, pretend they're blank. The symbol from the ledger lives out here too. It shows up stamped into a leather fob we couldn't pair to any key. The same circle cut by a line, a habit turned emblem. Is it a warning or a signpost? The coordinates say neither and both. They say come see. Midpoints don't announce themselves with music. They move weight from one hand to the other and wait for you to notice. What do we call a pattern that selects families with one child, purchases portable art in cash, wears names that belong to the missing, and files trinkets as if memory were a ledger? A club, a ring, and a veil are words that mean together and apart at once. The letter's line keeps circling back. Door, circle. Which did they find first? The tires hum a baritone under the car's thinner sounds. Ruiz taps the map where contour lines pinch into a mouth. There, he says, not with triumph, but resignation. We crest a low rise, and the sun slides sideways, throwing seams into relief. A shadow clings where rock overhangs a shallow runnel. From this distance, it could be a washout, a den, or a trick of angle. The numbers say it's exactly what it is, not what it looks like. We park where the track turns from suggestion into superstition. The heat has a weight. The wind has a voice. We shoulder tools and step out, because the only honest way to test a theory is to put your feet on the ground it names. The camera's red tally glows. The recorder ticks. The dust lifts in small ghosts around our boots. I think of the table set for 3 in a room we've never entered. I think of a bracelet meant for a child who spelled her name 1 bead at a time. I think of a line through a circle, carved into margins by a hand that must have practiced it until it felt like a prayer. If this place holds a cache, it will be paper and metal and rooms inside rooms. If it holds something else, we will learn its shape by the silence it keeps. We are late to whatever party this is. We are on time for the part that's left. The overhang darkens as we near. The air cools half a degree. The rock face bears scratches you could mistake for age if you wanted to. One mark is not age. It is deliberate and small, and exactly where a careful person would leave it. The circle, the cut, and the question that never stops asking: did they draw it to keep us back, or to make sure we did not miss the way in? The mark sits where a careful hand would leave it, low on the rock so noon ignores it, high enough that dusk can't. A circle cut by a line. We belly through the slot one at a time, shoulders grazing grit, air tasting like cardboard and old rain, and spill into a pocket room the canyon forgot. Our beams are skimboards stacked as a false wall. A thin string glints, no blast, just a warning bell. Ruiz clips it with a pocket blade. Breath held, then eases the boards aside. The chest inside is a contractor's kind. Paint spattered and hasp scarred, but never locked. The lid opens with a dry sigh. Paper breathes out, envelopes labeled in steady block caps. Receipts doubled with one digit altered. A folded map circled in a canyon that isn't this one. 3 passports that try not to resemble each other and fail. A pouch of rings, one bent flat like a door, had an opinion. A cassette, label blank, ribbon smelling faintly of wet metal. I brought the ugly player, because sometimes voices wait decades for ears. A hiss rises, then a breath, then a voice toned to pass anywhere. If you're hearing this, you found the door we drew. A scrape, a second voice in the room telling the first to hurry. We were told it was a door, the first says. We learned it was a circle. The tape clicks out like a secret changing its mind. We sit with the quiet because quiet tells you if you missed anything. That's when a light moves beyond the crawl, wobble, pause, and withdraw. Human, not wind. Ruiz douses his beam. We back into the seam, slow enough not to sound like prey, fast enough not to be foolish. Outside, twilight has thickened into something with teeth. A figure waits on the ridge, just a hood and the reflective suggestion of eyes. My palm rises, empty, no reply. A small bundle arcs and thumps the dust by my boot, canvas tied with a shoelace. By the time I look up, the ridge is a rumor, and the rumor is gone. The bundle is heavier than it looks. Inside, a Polaroid in a sleeve, its gray still waking. A compass with its face reversed, so east argues with west. A tiny flashlight, a note printed, like someone trying hard not to feel. You're late. We follow a sound more than a silhouette, stone ticking under weight, sand shushing back. Twice the runner lets a pebble go on purpose. Twice I pretend not to hear the courtesy. At the crest, only wind. A single sneaker print, heel deep, toe turned toward the cut. Not a boot, not a hiker. Practice. Back at the cache, we work like the book taught us. Photos, flags, and measurements. But the scene feels like a conversation we joined mid-sentence. We set the trip line back without arming it. We bag the tape, the map, the rings, the passports, and the note. We leave a card in a zip bag under a flat stone the size of a hand. Receipt, not dare. On the drive out, the Polaroid decides to be something. The bright edge of a table, 3 plates, and 1 chair pulled back, as if someone stood and forgot to return. The reversed compass needle jitters on my knee, pointing at a version of direction that wants us wrong. Shepherding, Ruiz says. Not quite a question. Maybe. Or testing whether we read the world backward and still arrive. Why draw the sign, stash the box, and watch the door? Because somebody once lived both roles, caller and called. The radio spits a weather warning with no weather. A coyote writes a sentence across the wash and edits it with its tail. I turn the cassette over in my hand. The word on it isn't a label. It's silence. We came for facts and left with objects that act like people. A chest that exhaled, a tape that confessed, a note that accused, a compass that lied politely, and a photograph that took its time deciding what to show. How close did we walk to the hand that set them? How long can a circle pretend to be a door before it gives itself away? The road answers, like roads do, by continuing. The confession doesn't arrive as a headline. It arrives as a folded napkin. Blue ink bleeding where a hand pressed too hard. Truck stop lights hum like tired bees. Coffee tastes of burnt sugar. He calls himself Merit, a name that fits like a borrowed coat. A pale scar rides his jaw. He studies my notebook, not my badge. You're carrying their story, he says. Say it simply, I tell him. No opera. No opera, he agrees. He draws a loop on the napkin, then a short line cutting it out. A canyon mark reduced to a gesture. Not a club, not a cult. A circle that rents out lives. You pay in faces. I keep my pen still. Them? He rolls a sugar packet between thumb and forefinger. Both, he says. And neither. He built doors. She learned which rooms to open. Doors turn into circles if you walk long enough. Were they taken? He tilts his head. Taken implies a shove. This was a hallway that never ended. He stares past me, as if an old knight has reappeared on the far wall. I saw them once after the cameras left, 3 cars in a driveway that wasn't theirs. He said, we can leave after this. He said, we kept enough to make a trade. He said, no one wants a war of names. Merit doesn't drink the water he asks for. They left maps for someone exactly like you. He nods at my pocket without looking. The reversed compass rides there, patient as a lie. Where did they go? Forward, he says. And forward was a circle. He folds the napkin once, twice. On the bottom, coordinates I'm already learning to dread, and a line of print. They planted a garden of masks. He leaves exact cash for coffee and walks into wind that pushes dust like thoughts. We don't wait for air to stop shaking. A row of apartments murmurs through window units. Numbers repeat until they lose meaning. The woman opens her door to the exact limit of a chain. A child's drawing is taped by the peephole. Stick waves, a rectangle boat, and a smiling Sunday. She watches our mouths. He wore a watch that didn't tick, she says, and I know which he. She smiled like it mattered who brought the wine, and I know which she. They didn't steal from strangers. They earned it first. People want to be chosen. It's the cheapest door. Who were you? I ask. A front desk, she says. Names go there to rest. She slips a softened photo through the gap. A hand resting by a fountain pen. A crisp cuff with plastic beads half hidden. And a child's name spelled in cheap color. Found it in a trash can the day after they stopped coming. People don't throw away what they never held. Why keep it? Because you came, she says. Because someone somewhere keeps setting an extra plate. She doesn't want a card. The chain whispers closed. Rumor and records start to wrestle in the car. Merit's circle. The woman's hunger. 2 maps of the same country. We follow the napkin numbers to a self-storage yard where doors line up like unblinking lids. The manager carries a ring of keys that sings when he walks. Been paid on time, he says, by someone I never see. The door rolls up like a memory changing its mind. A table no one eats at. A lamp on a timer. 1 chair with a coat folded over it. A box fan unplugged. Life arranged as display, not use. On the table, a ledger with tidy figures. At the back, a banker's box labeled in neat print. After. We open it like a door. Blank forms signed at the bottom. A zip bag with a lock of hair bound in red thread. A phone with its battery taped to its back. A Polaroid that refuses to develop. A note on top. If you're reading, we ran out of names. It is enough to change everything, and not nearly enough. Cut the next one? The manager asks, nodding at an identical lock. 1 unit over. Same payer. Same punctuality. I hear Merit again. You're carrying their story. The temptation is to choose the version that harms least. The ethic is to carry the one that hurts correctly. Ruiz scribbles tags. I sit with the ledger, feeling the indentations of a hand that pressed too hard long before mine. Did they plant insurance or invitation? Did they try to leave or teach leaving? Which answer serves the living, and which only makes a better ending? Wind writes grit along the metal doors, line after line, like rain on paper. Somewhere a timer clicks and a lamp obeys. The place gives no answer. The record holds, the rumor grows. The storage yard siren doesn't blare so much as breathe, a red pulse against corrugated rows, a patient heartbeat in metal. The manager meets us at the chain with keys chiming shamefully. Motion trip, he says. 2 units. Our unit sits as we left it. Table, lamp, ledger. But the identical door 1 row over hangs crooked, lock sheared, a thread of smoke exploring the seam. Ruiz doesn't wait. He rolls the door. Heat sighs out. Flames nip along cardboard like animals learning the fence. A tote splits with a plastic gasp. Somewhere inside, a steady tick keeps time as if none of it matters. Back, I say. But he's already on the extinguisher, powder blooming gray. When the hiss fades, the tick grows louder. A metronome, blackened wood and brass, arm insisting, left, right, left. On a charred box, a note has curled from heat, not yours to keep, the same exact hand as the canyon cache. They were here, Ruiz says. Powder floats like unseasonal snow. The manager points toward the fence. The gate camera got a hood and gloves. Inside, aisle cameras glitched. Between doors, footprints stamp a narrative. The same starburst tread we've been catching on mud and motel dust for months. We follow the trail to where the chain link has been levered up with a length of rebar. Beyond, a drainage ditch folds black under a concrete bridge, oilskin water reflecting a broken rope of sodium lights. A figure rises from that shadow like a film burn, not running, only waiting until I'm close enough to make it difficult. Stop, I say. He doesn't. The duffel in his hand knocks his leg. Something square inside thudding. I reach the rail as he swings the bag. I catch the strap. For a breath, we are 1 rope. No threats, no names. Only weight. His wrist is wire and tendon. Let go, he says, conversational, as if we're choosing chairs at a table. Not tonight, I tell him, and his eyes accept the surprise without blinking. The leather bites. The seam gives not the zipper but a pre-cut. A choice he made before coming. Papers spill out like ash-feathered birds. Something heavier slides, almost into the dark, and catches on concrete ribs. A green notebook, cheap elastic limp as a tired muscle. He doesn't swear. He steps into me instead of away. A small, clean body check that feels almost polite. My grip fails. He drops backward into the ditch, folding into it like he knows where stones are. The water barely argues. Ruiz's beam breaks the surface into knives. A sleeve shows and disappears. Then only the city hums. We drag the notebook up. Ledger of doors, the first page says. Columns run neat and cruel. Date, place, host, child, outcome. At the far right, a new heading. Trade. Merritt's word, Ruiz says, meaning the napkin circles and the sugar packet. The offer that sounded like weather. We turn back toward the units. On our car hood, a chalk symbol waits, the little loop cut by a line, childish and precise. Under it, a brass key rests, stamped C12. Tape clings to the head with a square of paper. Locker. And a city that prefers transience and no questions. Courtesy, choreography. They're always generous with directions. The duffel's survivors litter the walkway. We gather who hasn't drowned. 3 tickets never used. 2 faces in passports that belong to other lives. A photograph that will not finish developing even when we warm it with our palms. And a ring that fits no documented finger. In the torn lining, I find a cassette with a blank label. When I shake it, the tape whispers like a moth in a jar. The manager returns. Fire's out, he says. Sprinklers didn't trigger. Lucky. I nod and do not agree. Inside the scorched unit, the metronome keeps insisting on a time nobody here can keep. My phone buzzes with no number. One line lands. Bridge. No lights. Last time. The punctuation is merciful. We don't go, Ruiz says, but he says it like an invitation to argue. The chalk loop dries. The key gleams the way cheap metal does under sodium. Like it's gold if you want it to be. What weighs more? The hope the missing are waiting there? Or the knowledge that waiting is the trick? We drive 2 blocks out and kill the headlights, because procedure is a language the river doesn't speak. Concrete holds old footfalls the way it holds cold. Water moves without deciding to. Midspan is darker than it should be. A figure leans on the rail, face turned down to listen to something that isn't us. I feel the green notebook's weight even though it's in Ruiz's jacket. I feel the chalk loop circle like a hand around the throat of the night. The figure doesn't turn. Maybe it's the same man. Maybe it's only a role. We're here, I say, low. The river says nothing. The city holds its breath like it's been here before. Some stories do not end. They learn to wait. The river keeps its own counsel. Midspan, a figure leaves a small brass key on the rail. The label scratched. A new city scrawled in pencil, like you can edit a map with hope. You keep chasing maps, he says. Voice more wind than throat. Maps aren't the country. Then he is gone. Down the service ladder, locals pretend not to see. We take the key. We don't pretend to understand the arithmetic. Morning, a storage locker opens with the easiest click in the world. The room smells like rubber and cold dust. Unit C12 holds a carry-on, zipper teeth bright as coins. Inside, envelopes numbered in pencil, sleeved negatives, a glove mounted on cardboard to keep its shape, and a photograph of a dining table holding its breath, with 2 curls of wax arrested mid-fall. In the lid, a cassette waits behind gaffer tape. Hiss, dates recited like prayers, room tones, a radio scanning dead air, and at the end, a single sentence, tired and almost kind. Tell it straight or don't tell it. We copy it. One to a lab that doesn't answer to us. One to a safe with a code we will not write down. Institutions prefer sunlight. A podium appears. A spokesperson says what a spokesperson can say. Coordination, review, ongoing. No names, no theories. Questions bloom and are clipped. The room empties as if language were something spilled and mopped. On paper, the search widens. In rooms, the story narrows. A relative asks to see the dining photo without the stamp. We print it on plain paper. The light goes pale. They ate late, she says, smiling like something practiced. Her eyes stay on the wax hanging in air. You won't find graves, she adds. Not a threat, not a prophecy. You'll find rooms. We go back to the first room because endings like to live in beginnings. The house leans towards sale. Stickers on latches. A realtor's box yawning at the door. The table still believes in the company. We set a metronome, a survivor from the scorched cache, at its center and wind it once. Tick, tick. Ruiz places the green notebook beside it. I lay the duplicate key next to both, because sometimes it matters to see what we're pretending opens doors. In that small sound, the dust seems to organize. What now? Ruiz asks. Now we tell it straight, I say, because a voice with nothing left to buy asked us to. Straight is not simple. Straight includes the neighbor who watered hedges and remembers an engine idling twice in one night. The clerk who slid a receipt into a bag and never said which hand took it. And the archivist who noticed an extra pencil code in a file nobody requested for 20 years. Straight includes that we arrived late everywhere, and we're still not too late to leave the door unlatched for whoever comes next. We don't take the metronome. We let it keep time for a table that has been waiting longer than we have been breathing. Outside, a sign advertises square footage and baths. Wind lifts dead ivy the way a body learns to practice life. Down the block, a kid rolls a ball that can't decide which side of the street it belongs to. The official file thickens. A host says the word mystery and smiles like the air is sweet. A family sets 2 plates because habit is the most religious thing we do. Somewhere a bridge collects another sentence written in a hand that misspells on purpose. The key stays on a ring. The ledger stays in a safe. The cassette's hiss stays the only weather we can replay. The place gives no answer. The record holds. The rumor grows. We close the gate gently and let it lock behind us. In the photograph, the wax remains mid-fall. In this light, it looks soft enough to move. It does not, at least not while we are watching. If you found yourself immersed in this story and want to hear more haunting accounts where mystery and human choices collide, make sure to subscribe. Your support allows these stories to keep being told, so the names of the lost are never swallowed by silence again.